By comparing the treatment of the subject or scene, we can better understand what is emphasized or absent in each poem. By the end of this lesson, you will have improved your understanding of ekphrases and be able to analyze and compare poems with more depth and insight. Let's get started. Objectives. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to improve your understanding of ekphrases, writing inspired by art. Analyze the representation of a subject or a key scene in two poems, including what is emphasized or absent in each treatment. What is ekphrases? Writing inspired by a work of art is called ekphrases. When this writing takes the form of poetry, it is called ekphrastic poetry. Ode on a Grecian Urn. One of the best-known examples of ekphrastic poetry is the poem Ode on a Grecian Urn, published by English Romantic poet John Keats in 1820. Keats had seen the Elgin Marbles, a collection of marble sculptures from ancient Greece that had recently arrived in London. He was greatly inspired by these works and believed that classical Greek art captured the virtues of ancient Greek society. Keats's poem Ode on a Grecian Urn is an ode, a lyric poem addressing an object or theme, usually with admiration. This was not the first ode Keats wrote. Keats also wrote Ode to a Nightingale, as well as poems about more abstract subjects like autumn, melancholy, and indolence. In this case, his ode is to a Grecian urn, a particular type of vase from ancient Greece. Please read the Keats's poem and continue for an analysis. Ode on a Grecian Urn.
1. Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, sylvan historian, who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme, what leaf-fringed legend haunts about thy shape of deities or mortals, or of both, in Tempe or the dales of Arcady? What men or gods are these? What maidens loath? What mad pursuit? What struggle to escape? What pipes and timbrels? What wild ecstasy? 2. Heard melodies are sweet, but those unheard are sweeter, therefore, ye soft pipes, play on, not to the sensual ear, but, more endeared, pipe to the spirit ditties of no not leave thy song, nor ever can those trees be bare, bold lover, never, and she be fair. 3. That leaves a hard with forced branches.
Here is an activity. Keats's poem Ode on a Grecian Urn can be considered an example of ekphrastic poetry because blank. Choose the correct answer. Here is an activity. Who is the narrator addressing in the following stanza? Thou still unravished bride of quietness. Thou foster child of silence and slow time. Choose the correct answer. Understanding Ode on a Grecian Urn. Keats's poem Ode on a Grecian Urn is divided into 5 stanzas. A stanza is a group of lines in a poem. In the first stanza, the narrator stands in front of the urn. With the word thou, the speaker addresses the urn directly. He first observes the urn at the most basic level. He notices its pictures frozen in time. He describes the urn as a historian. He begins to look more closely and wonder about the pictures painted on the urn. He considers where they come from and what story they tell. He notices a picture of a group of men pursuing a group of women and wonders about their story. In the next stanza, we see the narrator examining the urn more closely. He sees a picture of a young man lying with a woman beneath some trees. The man is playing a pipe, and the narrator imagines what his music sounds like. While the first stanza consists of more neutral observation, we see the narrator taking more of a stand in these lines. He is expressing his admiration for the beautiful images on the urn. He is romanticizing what he sees there, viewing it in an idealized way. Because he cannot see the scenes on the urn in real life, he fills in the blanks by imagining things in the most beautiful, perfect way possible. In the third stanza, the narrator continues to view images on the urn in this romantic light. He admires the frozen nature of these images and the fact that they will never lose their beauty. In this sense, he is admiring the urn as a work of art in a way that he could never admire the real world. In the fourth stanza, the narrator looks at another picture on the urn. This picture shows a group of villagers taking a cow to be sacrificed. He wonders where they came from and where they are going. When he wonders these things, he admits that he can never really know what was going on in these scenes. Yet, imagining the little town of the people depicted, he again admires the frozen nature of time in this image. In the fifth and final stanza of the poem, the narrator once again addresses the urn itself. He knows that the urn will exist long after he does, and that it will continue to share an important lesson with all who see it. He ends with the famous lines, "Beauty is truth, truth beauty. That is all or ye know on earth, and all ye need to know." Here is an activity. What does Keats mean when he refers to the urn as a historian? Choose the correct answer. Here is an activity. What do these lines from the poem's first stanza reveal? Thou still unravished bride of quietness. Thou foster child of silence and slow time. Choose the correct answer. Ode on a Grecian Urn. Analysis. Keats's poem Ode on a Grecian Urn has come to be accepted as one of his most beautiful and memorable works. However, at the time Keats wrote the poem, it was not very well received. Readers and critics found it difficult to understand why Keats would write a poem describing a work of art. If people wanted to appreciate a Grecian urn, many reasoned, they could go look at one themselves. What then is the purpose of Keats's poem? Does it have any value beyond that of simply looking at the urn? In this poem, Keats takes a common museum object and reflects on it deeply. At the most basic level, this forces readers to take the time to consider the urn's images and, as Keats does, reflect on their meaning. Not all museum visitors would be likely to consider this object with the same devoted attention. Beyond this basic mission, Keats uses the poem to emphasize the things about the urn he finds most important. One of the poem's major themes is mourning the temporary nature of things in the human world. Keats expresses this idea by admiring the eternal nature of things in art. The images on the urn exist outside of human time. While Keats sees beauty in this idea, he also sees its limitations. While the characters he sees will never age, nor will they experience the beauty of human life. By reflecting on the images in the urn, Keats expresses an understanding of the fragility of human life, its beauty and limitations. Throughout the poem, the narrator tries to engage with the urn by asking a series of questions about the scenes depicted. For example, in the first stanza, as he looks at the picture of men chasing women, he asks, "What men or gods are these? What maidens loth?" Because it is a frozen object of art, the urn, of course, does not respond. This lack of response leads the narrator to his conclusion in the last stanza. While the urn can be considered a friend to man, it can never be mortal. The last two lines of the poem are open to many interpretations. Some believe that the narrator is addressing the urn, while others think that the urn might be addressing its human viewers. For those who believe that the narrator is addressing the urn, these lines could be seen as a reminder of the urn's limitations. Its beauty is powerful, but the narrator knows it does not hold knowledge about the complexities of the human world. On the other hand, if the urn is addressing mankind, the words can be understood as a lesson to look past all the complications of the human world that so often bog us down. Instead, the urn seems to suggest that we only need to remember that truth and beauty are one and the same. Here is an activity. The narrator's attempts to engage with the urn are met with blank, prompting him to reflect on its lack of humanity. Choose the correct answer. Here is an activity. What is the purpose of the line "bold lover, never, never canst thou kiss" in the stanza? Click here to view the stanza from the poem Ode on a Grecian Urn. Choose the correct answer. On the Medusa of Leonardo da Vinci. Another famous example of ekphrastic poetry is on the Medusa of Leonardo da Vinci in the Florentine Gallery, also written by an English Romantic poet, Percy Bysshe Shelley. Shelley was inspired to write this poem by a painting of Medusa he saw in Italy. For many years, the painting was believed to be by Leonardo da Vinci, but people have since come to believe that it is the work of a Flemish artist. Like Keats' poem, Shelley too references ancient Greece. Medusa was a character from Greek mythology. Once a beautiful woman, the goddess Athena punished Medusa for disrespecting her temple. She turned Medusa into a monster with snakes instead of hair. Anyone who looked directly at Medusa was turned into stone. Perseus, a Greek hero, managed to kill Medusa by looking at her reflection instead of looking at her directly. He chopped off her head and sent it to the goddess Athena. The painting shows Medusa after she has lost her head.
Please read Shelley's poem on the Medusa of Leonardo da Vinci in the Florentine Gallery below and continue for an analysis. On the Medusa of Leonardo da Vinci in the Florentine Gallery 1. It lieth, gazing on the midnight sky, upon the cloudy mountain peak supine, below, far lands are seen tremblingly, its horror and its beauty are divine. Upon its lips and eyelids seems to lie loveliness like a shadow, from which shine, fiery and lurid, struggling underneath, the agonies of anguish and of death. 2. Yet it is less the horror than the grace which turns the gazer's spirit into stone, whereon the lineaments of that dead face are graven, till the characters be grown into itself, and thought no.
Here is an activity. What does the word it refer to in the poem's first stanza? It lieth, gazing on the midnight sky, upon the cloudy mountain peak supine. Below, far lands are seen tremblingly. Its horror and its beauty are divine. Upon its lips and eyelids seems to lie loveliness like a shadow from which shine, fiery and lurid, struggling underneath, the agonies of anguish and of death. Choose the correct answer. Here is an activity. What is one common feature of Ode on a Grecian Urn and on Medusa? Choose the correct answer. Understanding on the Medusa of Leonardo da Vinci. As with Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn, people at that time were confused by Shelley's poem. Why write a poem about a work of art that already existed? What could be gained in this medium? In a sense, Shelley's poem is similar to that of Keats. It draws the reader's attention to the work of art in a prolonged and different way. Shelley attempts to capture the spirit of the painting, that is, its graceful depiction of a ghastly subject. Over the course of the poem, we notice a shift in the narrator's perception. In the first stanza, he refers to Medusa as it and a dead face. By the end of the poem, he has a greater sense of compassion for Medusa, and evident as he describes her in more human terms. Like Medusa herself, the narrator is transformed by looking at the work of art. Like Keats, Shelley is concerned with the notion of beauty in this work of art. In the case of this painting, however, it is the relationship between beauty and agony that most interests Shelley. This is particularly evident at the end of the poem's second stanza. Yet it is less the horror than the grace, which turns the gazer's spirit into stone, whereon the lineaments of that dead face are graven, till the characters be grown into itself, and thought no more can trace. 'Tis the melodious hue of beauty thrown athwart the darkness and the glare of pain, which humanize and harmonize the strain. The beauty of the image, Shelley realizes, does not lessen the message of agony it conveys. Rather, the agony depicted gives the art a human quality. It is interesting to consider the idea of interpretation in this poem. The painting once thought to be by Da Vinci is already an interpretation of the Medusa story. The artist has already deliberately depicted Medusa in a certain way, emphasizing the details that he thought were important. Shelley's poem, then, can be considered an interpretation of an interpretation. This is an important feature of ekphrastic poetry. It offers a second interpretation of a subject which has already been artistically interpreted. Shelley acknowledges this in the poem's title, On the Medusa of Leonardo da Vinci in the Florentine Gallery. This title mentions the artist's name and situates the viewer in the Florentine Gallery. However, as the poem progresses, there is no mention of the artist or acknowledgement of the artist's interpretation. Medusa becomes like a real subject directly before the viewer. Similarly, Keats identifies more and more deeply with his subjects as he observes the Grecian urn. Absent from both poems is any real acknowledgement of the artist or the artist's work in interpreting their subject. On Romantic poetry. Both Shelley and Keats were part of the Romantic movement. As you might have guessed, Romantic poetry does not necessarily have to do with love. Romanticism was a movement of art and literature in the 18th and 19th centuries. Romantic poets favored natural, emotional, and artistic themes in their work. Romantics like William Wordsworth wrote poetry that emphasized intuition over reason. It celebrated the pastoral and idealized view of country life over the urban. Romantic poets also had an interest in mystical and supernatural themes. Keats and Shelley were among the most prominent Romantic poets. In Ode on a Grecian Urn, we see Keats's interest in nature and the beauty of life in rural settings. In Shelley's poem, we see the romantic interest in the mystical and supernatural. Of course, artistic themes are present as well. Both poets were inspired by the works of art. Here is an activity. Which line below best sums up Shelley's interest in the painting's graceful depiction of a ghastly subject? Choose the correct answer. Here is an activity. Which line from the poem's last stanza shows the narrator describing Medusa with more human qualities? Choose the correct answer. Here is an activity. Drag the labels to the correct slots. Lesson review. Writing inspired by a work of art is called ekphrasis. When poetry is inspired from any work of art, it is called ekphrastic poetry. Keats's poem Ode on a Grecian Urn is an example of ekphrastic poetry because it draws inspiration from a work of art. In his poem on the Medusa of Leonardo da Vinci, Shelley attempts to capture the spirit of the painting of Medusa, that is, its graceful depiction of a ghastly subject. In Ode on a Grecian Urn, we see Keats's interest in nature and the beauty of life in rural settings. In Shelley's poem, we see the romantic interest in the mystical and supernatural. Lesson vocabulary words. Ekphrases, writing inspired by a work of art. Ekphrastic poetry, poetry inspired by a work of art. Ode, a lyric poem addressing an object or theme, usually with admiration. Pastoral, a work of literature depicting an idealized version of life in the country. Romantic movement, a movement of art and literature during the late 18th and early 19th centuries. Stanza, a group of lines in a poem. Subject, the person or thing being discussed or described in literature. To romanticize, to view something in an idealized way. Urn, a tall, rounded vase, often decorated with a stand at the bottom.